Hello, friends. Welcome to our live podcast, webcast, Facebook Live event. My name is Rueffert. Some of you may know me as the chef with no stomach. I'm a longtime friend of Debbie's Dream Foundation. Just a quick history, I've known Debbie Zellman, or knew Debbie Zellman pretty much from, all the way back to 2000, mid-2000s, probably 2005-ish, 2007-ish. Was friends with J.P. Gallagher, who started the Gastric Cancer Foundation, which I've been a part of for the past 10 years. Have known Debbie, and Debbie and J.P. Gallagher and I talked about doing something like this many, many years ago. And honestly, I'm excited that we're finally doing it. So if you know who I am, welcome back to one of my crazy cooking things. If you don't know who I am, I don't want to go through my whole story, but I'm a stomach cancer survivor. In fact, I'll be 15 years cancer-free coming up July the 12th, so in a couple weeks. And so I have spent the last 15 years of my life really focusing on that connection between what we eat and how we feel. So with no stomach, and I know many of you watching this have some sort of GI issues, whether it's a partial gastrectomy or a total gastrectomy, or maybe that's in your future. That diagnosis of gastric cancer doesn't necessarily mean the end of food. It just means maybe you have to focus a little bit on what you eat. So maybe rather than think of it as being limited, think of it as being more like focused. So I try to focus on foods that are seasonal. We're in the very beginning of peach season here in Georgia, but also that are nutritionally dense, and because you do have limited digestion, or you will have, or if you're a stomach person that are watching that are just interested, everything that you put into your engine, which is an analogy I use quite often, affects how we feel. So that's something that you really have to focus on if you're interested in your health, particularly if your GI has been somewhat compromised. So on that end, my friends at Debbie's Dream asked me to do a little summer kind of a cooking demonstration in advance of July 4th weekend. And I know many of you maybe in previous years used to go out for July 4th. That might not be an option this year. So a lot of people are cooking at home. So we wanted to kind of focus on some easy to prepare, approachable, not anything crazy weird, although there's a couple weird things in here, but also easy to absorb, easy to digest. That's kind of the theme that pretty much runs throughout all of my cooking things. And what's interesting for, again, the fully stomached people have found that eating this kind of plant-forward style cuisine or food has made them feel better as well. So if you're tuning in and you're wondering, wait a second, why am I watching this? I have nothing to do with stomach cancer. You might not now, but I guarantee you at some point you're gonna know someone that has GI issues. And again, even if you have a completely, perfectly healthy, intact GI system, congratulations, but you gotta take care of it. So these are all foods that'll help you on that front. Let's dive right into it. Now, if you have ever seen any of my cooking things, I rarely ever have recipes. In fact, I can do 10 of these a day, but when it comes to recipes, it was like pulling teeth to get me to do these recipes. And part of that reason is I love to be able to react to what's fresh at the market. So even today, or even last night, as I was kind of putting the finishing touches on that, I'm like, oh, no worries, I'll go and grab some blueberries. And both of my local markets were almost out of blueberries. I only have a tiny amount of blueberries, so we're gonna do some blackberries where it says blueberries. So if you are looking at these recipes, just know that these are meant to be a jumping on point, right? These are not rules. My recipe police are not gonna come knock on your door if you stray from them. If there's an ingredient on these recipes that you're not a fan of or you can't get access to right now, you can swap them out. So these are really just meant to be a guideline. But again, my friends at Debbie's Dream felt it was important that we have some recipes. They twisted my arm a bit. So this is sort of limited edition. Hans has recipes, oh my God. It's 2020, something's got to have a little strange happening. But I'm gonna start a little bit in reverse order. So I've got 4 things we're gonna make today, but one of them takes a lot longer than the other, and that's the sauce for these jackfruit sloppy joes. So jackfruit, if you're not familiar with it, it is a fruit. It's a big, giant, green, spiky thing. They sometimes average about 18, 20 pounds. When they are fully ripe, they're very sweet. It's a fantastic fruit. When they are green, so when they're unripe, they have the consistency of pulled pork, or even some might compare it to kind of flaked crab meat. So it's a really great, easily digestible vegetarian option as a meat substitute. So oftentimes meat's a difficult thing for us to digest when we don't have a stomach because we don't have stomach acid, and so it's hard to break that down. So the plant-based varieties or cheats, so to speak, are a great way to do that. So the sauce I want to make uses just a regular can of tomato sauce, and just read the ingredients. Once you kind of get your toe dipped into this whole world of nutrition, you become a bit of a ingredient sleuth, and this is basically just tomatoes and water and tomato paste. There's no high fructose corn syrup, not tons of salt in there. It really is just a simple tomato sauce. So that's one, I think it's a 15 ounce can, or 425 grams for my metric friends. And this is one of those things that just gets better as it goes, right? And actually, I'm already doing this backwards. See, I don't do recipes normally. First, I need to get some saute going. I'm going to saute the onions and red peppers that go in this sauce. I'm going to do those in a skillet, and I'll add it to this. But I want to have some time for this to kind of simmer and cook down and thicken up a little bit. So to that end, I have some aromatics here. I have about a half of a diced white onion, and I'm in Georgia, so I'm using Vidalia onions. It's almost required that I do. They're naturally sweeter than a normal onion. They are less kind of less sulfuric, so they're not as strong. They don't make you cry as much, and also they're much easier to digest because, again, they don't have that high sulfur content. Into my skillet, I'm going to go in with a little olive oil, and this is really just to be kind of my vehicle to sweat these things. So it is hot in here. I am sweating, but that's not what I'm talking about. The culinary term sweat really means to kind of wake up the ingredients, to kind of make them a little translucent. So I want to get those going in the skillet. There goes my diced onion, and then I have some, this is basically about a half of a big red bell pepper. I don't do so well with the green ones for whatever reason. I like the taste of the red ones better. It's a nice color change, and for me they're a little easier to digest. I actually, since I had a hot grill, I kind of blistered them on the grill a little bit, pulled just a little bit of the skin away, but you don't have to do that. That just kind of brings out a little of the it makes them a little bit concentrated in flavor if you do have an opportunity to grill them first, even if you're just using a skillet to blister the outsides. And if you have a gas range, you can even take a pair of tongs and hold them over the open flame and kind of get them blistered that way a little bit. So in goes those. So I just want those to sweat a little bit. Now, the recipe, again, kind of talks about how much time you should saute these, but since I already grilled those red peppers, and since we have a little bit of limited time together, I'm going to kind of skip ahead a little bit and add in the spice component to this, which is a little cumin, a little smoked paprika, and a little fresh minced garlic. So those three added at the beginning with that heat, with that little bit of oil, gives them a chance to also kind of wake up and bloom. You're releasing those essential oils that are trapped in the spices when you add them early on. Of course, you can add them at any point, but proportionally, you'll end up having to add a lot more spice if you do it at the end because it's just dry. It doesn't have a chance to kind of wake up as it does when you kind of toast it a little bit, or you could say I'm frying it because there's a tiny little bit of oil in there. And the smell already is fantastic. We've not quite figured out how to get the smell to you yet, but in the interim, you just have to do this yourself. Now, you can buy a prepared sloppy joe sauce, or even if you have a can of tomato sauce or a jar of pasta sauce, you can cheat and use that too. But I wanted to kind of show from the ground up how to make a simple one. All right, into that, I'm going to go with a little bit of molasses, or you can use sorghum. And this kind of gets into your own personal, how well you can digest these things. This will affect your glycemic index a little bit. If you don't know what that means, then you probably don't have to worry about it. But a lot of folks, when they become GI compromised, they might not be a diabetic technically, but eating like a diabetic can really help with those blood sugar crashes, or what's known as dumping syndrome. Not my favorite term. All right, now I'm going to go in with this. I'm just going to go keep it in the skillet. Why not? I've already dirtied the pot, but whatever. Let's just keep it in this. The more surface area you have like this, the more evaporation will happen. So this actually, the wider skillet will help kind of reduce it a bit. Now, into there too, I want to put a little bit of salt. The thing with salt is you can always add a little more. It's impossible to take it back out. So I'd rather you start light on the salt, and taste it often than put in too much salt. When you go overboard with the salt, the only remedy is to add more liquid, and then you end up kind of getting this watered down version of the sauce you're trying to make. I'm going to use a little bit of smoked salt. Now I use this quite often. A little goes a long way. It is salt, right? So if you have hypertension issues or you're worried about your sodium intake, this is still salt. It just happens to have been smoked over open alder wood. And so it has this really earthy kind of a flavor, which for the sauce that we're making, which you could say is sort of a variation on a barbecue sauce, it works really well for that. I've got the smoked paprika in there to have that little bit of smoked salt, really kind of gives it that umami, earthy kind of a flavor texture. So I want that profile in this sauce. And then also using a little bit of Bragg's liquid amino acids. I don't work for Bragg's, I don't endorse them. It's just the one that is the easiest one to find, and we always have it on our shelves. There are several alternates out there. The main difference between using a soy sauce and amino acids, number one, it has the essential amino acids that our body needs, and it is also made from soybeans like soy sauce, but it doesn't have the wheat component. So if you have gluten issues, amino acids are a great gluten-free option for that. So just about a teaspoon or so of that in there. And I'm going to put this on a simmer, and I'm going to let this simmer with the jackfruit. Let's talk about the jackfruit again. Let me move these out of the way. So the jackfruit, you can buy it fresh, which is it's a monster to mess with. You can buy it frozen, which is fantastic. You can buy it refrigerated in a pouch, which is what this is. This one actually already kind of came barbecued, and it's actually, for being a pouched product, it's actually fairly well. It's called the Jackfruit Company. And this, if you want to have something in the fridge that you can just take out of the package, put it on a tortilla or on a bun and have just an easy vegetarian sort of pulled pork style sandwich, the Jackfruit Company makes a great product. But if you buy it canned, as I did here, you would drain and rinse it because it's kept in a brine. And right now it's fairly firm, but I want this to kind of cook down and kind of fall apart a little bit so it gets that kind of mock pulled pork consistency. Or if you've been to a Mexican restaurant and had like a shredded chicken, that's the consistency it's going to get. But it takes a minute to get there. So I'm going to let it simmer in the sauce. So as the sauce kind of develops its flavor, it's also going to soften up the jackfruit a little bit. And since I have it here, again, this is the pouched variety. I'm just going to add that to it as well because it'll only get better. Oftentimes, if you do buy those convenience items, of course, read the instructions, read the ingredients to make sure that it's not heavy on preservatives and sugars and those kind of things. I particularly like this brand, but it's going to be even better with the sauce that I'm making. It just becomes a very different, more rich, robust kind of thing. And I should mention, anytime along this journey, as we're spending the next hour together, if you have questions, if there's something that I'm breezing by too quickly, this is live, if you're watching it live, and you can interact. And that's part of the fun of all this, is that even though I'm in Jasper, Georgia, you might be in Florida, or you might be in Spain, or you might be in California, or I know you might be in Germany, Toby. You can ask questions, you can chime in. And to that end, I would love to know who's watching. So take a moment, and you might already be, I don't see a screen, but if you have a minute to kind of chime in, let us know where you're watching from, what kind of things maybe you've been doing during this 2020 paradigm shift that we've had as far as it comes to travel and quarantine and lockdown and all that kind of stuff. So let's get the kind of conversation going too, if you don't mind. Let's open it up to questions or ideas or thoughts. And then I'll have either my son Finn, who's working one camera, or my good buddy Hewitt. They'll kind of relay those questions to me as they come up. So for now, we're going to forget about this barbecue sloppy Joe filler with the jackfruit and let it do its thing. And it's just going to bubble and have fun in the skillet and get softer and better and richer. And to that end, I always kind of joke that there's probably only about maybe 70% of me left after all of my surgeries. I have no stomach, I have no esophagus, I'm missing a collarbone, I'm missing some ribs. So I always like to think of myself as a reduced, condensed version of myself. So less of me, but hopefully a little more concentrated version of me. That's going to go, and we're going to switch over to our salad. Now, I do a series that lives on the Gastric Cancer Foundation's website, and that series is called the Gesundheit Kitchen, and I've done a lot of them, and they live on YouTube. You can go to them through gastriccancer.org. and go to the nutrition tab, and there's a whole bunch of these videos. And I do salad dressings from time to time because too often people buy these ready-made, store-bought, preservative-heavy salad dressings, and they eat a ton of dressing with a little bit of green. And so I like to make salad dressings that don't mask or are really overly heavy or oily, but they kind of wake up maybe the natural flavors of the salad. They kind of help become that vehicle to spread flavor throughout the salad, but they're really meant to be a dressing, not the meal. I know plenty of people that like to have a little lettuce with their salad dressing, but it should be the other way around. But salad dressing is just so easy to make. You can take advantage of whatever's at hand, leftover things, little dregs of jams or jellies. It's a very fun, very easy skill to have. And the dressing, because it usually has oil, it has vinegar, which are both natural preservatives. Sometimes it has honey, which is a natural preservative. They last for a really long time. So I always make quite a bit more dressing than I need for the one dish that I'm making, because that dressing can become tomorrow's marinade. It can be to use as a sauce on a piece of grilled salmon. So I'm making a ridiculous amount of dressing for one salad, but it's something you can keep in the fridge and use over and over again. So my kind of basic rule for these things is I use equal parts oil and acid. Now a lot of vinaigrettes will use kind of 3 to 1, 3 being the oil and 1 being the acid, and the acid being things like vinegar or lemon juice. I like to do more 1 to 1, which means you're going to get that kind of bright, tingly, pop that you're looking for in a salad dressing, but you don't have to put quite so much on there. So to that end, I'm going to use about a half a cup each of a good oil. It can be good extra virgin olive oil, it can be avocado oil, it can be whatever it is you have. This just happens to have the lines on here, so it's easy to see where a half a cup is. So there's a half a cup, and again, if you have ever watched my cooking things, you know this is a very weird thing that I'm actually looking at the measuring thing. So I can't stress that enough. This is not how I normally do this, but it is, obviously it's easy to translate if I am measuring it. But if you don't have something that's measured, just use your fingers. You got 2 fingers of oil or 3 fingers of oil, do 3 fingers of acid. If you are using a lemon juice or a lime juice, I would just reduce the amount of vinegar so that the total acid, so the total citrus juice or vinegar together equals the total oil. So, and you can see that. I mean, that's the beauty of that too, is they separate, and so you can see that there's pretty much equal parts of those 2 things. To that, I'm going to add some good local honey. It's about 1/4 a cup. I'm not measuring, just a good, couple of tablespoons there of local honey. A lot of evidence to support the notion that local honey helps you with seasonal local allergies, because you're actually sort of inoculating yourself, almost like a bit of a vaccine. You're giving yourself little tiny bits of the pollens from the surrounding flowering trees and shrubs and plants. And so that helps your body kind of be prepared for allergy season. And then roughly about the same amount as I did in honey with Greek yogurt. Now this gives really a couple things. It's flavor. It has the sort of twang and sourness that yogurt has. It has the probiotics, which are amazing in yogurt, which are, of course, the good bacteria that help us with digestion. So many times people ask me, how do you eat without a stomach? And my kind of smart-ass answer is usually with a knife and fork. But I know what they mean. Most people think that digestion happens in the stomach. But as I'm sure you know, or if you don't know, it's time to know that the stomach really is sort of this caustic, toxic waiting room that kind of gets food ready for digestion that happens in the intestines. So if you have half a stomach, or you're somewhat GI compromised, or if you have no stomach like me, you really have to kind of focus on what happens in your lower GI, which is your intestines, which is not really fun to talk about during a cooking segment, but I mean, that's the ultimate goal of all food, is to be able to get something out of it. So the good beneficial bacteria that are in foods like kimchi or sauerkraut, or in this case yogurt, you really want to try to get as much of that in as you possibly can, either with probiotic supplements or with these types of fermented natural living foods. And then to that, a little pinch of salt, and I just happen to have this smoked salt right here, so I'll use that. And I didn't put on the recipe garlic, but this garlic smells amazing. It's sitting right here, and I'll put a little garlic in there. Garlic also is a natural antifungal, antimicrobial, and it kind of works as a preservative. So you have 3 or 4 things in here that are essentially preservatives, and you can use a mason jar for this. It's what I typically do, or I'll use the end of a jam or jelly jar, like instead of scraping out the very last little bit of that good, expensive, cloudberry jam you got from Sweden, you can turn that into a cloudberry or lingonberry or whatever type dressing, raspberry vinaigrette, just by using the jam jar. Add your equal parts oil and vinegar with that little dregs of whatever jam was in there, give it a good shake, and it becomes a salad dressing. I also really like this shaker. OXO makes it. This is nice because not only does it make a tight seal that's got a rubber gasket around this pour spout, but it just fits your hand nicely, and you can store it in the fridge. And then whenever you want to have your salad dressing, you just pop the top, pour it out, and sometimes the dressing will separate again, and so you just close the top, shake it up again, and you kind of wake that up again and re-emulsify that dressing. But the Greek yogurt in there is going to give it a real kind of a buttery mouthfeel. So it's not going to drown the greens, but it's kind of coat the greens and give it that sort of silkiness that you look for in a good salad dressing. The salad that I'm putting together today really was inspired by the peaches and nectarines of the season. When I first started talking with my friends at Debbie's Dream about this particular menu, it was not quite peach season. We were getting early nectarines kind of coming in, so I was thinking nectarines. But again, being able to kind of pivot a little bit based on the ingredients, the peaches today, this morning, looked fantastic. So I got a couple of the white flesh nectarines as well as the yellow peaches. And in this area, Georgia is known as the peach state. We might not grow the most peaches anymore, but we do grow some of the best peaches. They are fantastic. So I have the peaches. These were what they call freestone variety, which means you can just pull the pit or the stone out. Brush just a little bit of a high temp oil on them, which you can use a grapeseed oil, avocado oil, and a pinch you can use olive oil. Olive oil just tends to burn a little easier than avocado or grapeseed oil. So I just put them on a grill, or you could even use a skillet. If you have problems digesting the skin, which I don't, I love the skin, I leave it on there, but once you throw it on the grill, the skins actually kind of remove themselves. So just that little bit of little char on the grill, and again, that's delicious. But I know some folks have a hard time digesting the skin. You can just peel those right off, and it's a beautiful, beautiful piece of fruit. And cooking the fruit, but not all the way through, kind of brings out the sugar content. So again, it's not like a piece of candy as far as your glycemic index goes, but the flavor is just amazing to have that little bit of char on there. But I haven't cooked it so much that I'm breaking down the digestive enzymes that are already in raw fruits and vegetables. So a lot of folks don't realize that undercooking your fruits and veggies, and I always kind of jokingly say I don't cook my vegetables, I threaten them, but by still having them somewhat raw in the middle, leaves intact those digestive enzymes that help your body break those foods down. So anytime you can just kind of give that little bit of a shock or a high heat, just like a sear, that's a great way to bring out those flavors without totally tearing apart the nutritional properties of that food. All right, let's kind of put the salad together here. Now, I love the kind of almost bitter nuttiness of arugula, and when you know it, I put it on my recipe. I'll go to the store, and the arugula looked terrible today. So it doesn't matter what green you use. I love arugula, I love watercress, but right now I am swimming in kale. There is so much kale happening in the garden right now. And so I like to use very young leaves of kale, so they're not so fibrous, as well as the variety. This happens to be a Siberian kale, but the younger the leaf, the easier it is to chew, and also doing what's called a chiffonade, cutting up very small so that the knife is doing some of the work for you on that. Got a question?
Yeah, so from Aaron Spruill, so does jackfruit using jackfruit as a meat substitute, does it provide a good source of protein?
So that's a great question. So the question again was whether or not jackfruit is a great source of protein. It has protein in it, and it's very easy to digest protein, but it's not so much as, say, beans or quinoa. And to that end, you can add lentils or beans or quinoa to this mixture. And so if you want to kind of add the protein level up, I tend to try to make a meal where I'm getting protein from multiple sources, and we're going to have some quinoa in the fries that go with the sandwich. So it is not one of the higher plant-based protein foods, but there is protein. I think it's like 4 grams of protein per serving, as opposed to, say, quinoa, which will have 12 grams of protein. So by the end of this meal, we're going to be getting in a full meal's worth of protein without using any animal products. but jackfruit on its own is not one of the higher ones. If you're looking to get that extra protein, make the same thing with something like tofu or tempeh. Those would be great high protein, or as I said, add in cooked lentils or cooked chickpeas, garbanzo beans, that kind of thing to boost the protein. All right, let's assemble this. And hi, Aaron, by the way, thank you for that question. Now, as I mentioned, I don't want to put a ton of dressing on here. I just want to have enough to where I'm coating the leaves. I do love a salad though where the dressing is actually kind of worked into to the salad. And kale's great in that you can actually, if you're the only one eating this, you can stick your hand in there and really massage the kale and kind of work the dressing into it. It'll hold up to a bit of abuse. I feed my camera crew, so I'm not going to go diving straight into this. You can always grab a food grade glove too and just put that glove on and go through and dive around in this. But and also a mix of greens would be great. Spinach, arugula, baby beet greens, or chard would be fantastic in this. But right now, like I said, I've got some fantastic kale on hand, and so that's what I'm going to use for this particular salad. Let's plate this up. Now, I probably have, this is sort of a double portion, I guess. There's no way I'm going to eat all of this, but it'll make for a nice presentation. You can also serve this family style. You know, if you've got a gathering, get a nice big platter, load it up full of greens, and your peaches or nectarines. So to that end, I'm going to kind of dot these guys around here. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the blueberries were a bit hard to come by, but I did find some blueberries. It is blueberry season, but I think it's also because it's 4th of July weekend, and there's the whole red, white, and blue thing going on. The strawberries and the blueberries were going quickly. So I will add what few that I found on here, and those not only add the antioxidants and the flavor and the pop, but it's the visual interest. You know, I always sort of say you eat with your eyes first, not literally, but having that contrast of the blue and the yellow and the white from the nectarines, and then lastly, totally optionally, I love a good goat cheese, and this is sometimes called chev. This one happens to be from a local dairy. But also feta works really well for this, or there's an Italian cheese called ricotta salata, which has that nice dry kind of crumbliness to it, but doesn't have the twang of a feta or a goat cheese. So if you don't like feta and goat cheese, try ricotta salata, S-A-L-A-T-A, ricotta salata. Makes a really nice addition to this. But again, I can't get enough of the goat cheese. I think it's a fantastic, it's got sort of a dry sharpness to it, which pairs well with the sweetness of the fruit and the acidity of the salad dressing. To me, that is a perfect summer salad. The other great thing about that is this will hold in the fridge for at least a solid day, maybe 2 days if you cover it well. So you could make this ahead of time. And what I often do is I will make things like this, you know, en masse, so that I'll eat a little now. I'll go off and play in the garden or throw the frisbee at my daughter, throw the frisbee with my daughter, not at my daughter. But anyway, and then come back to it. So it's the kind of thing that holds up well, especially if you have a more kind of solid green like the kale. It can hold up to abuse. It'll last a lot longer than the arugula or the watercress would. That's more of a immediate style salad. So that is a beautiful looking salad. We should grab a...
So this is a pretty question. Alan Cohen says, I can't eat kale or lettuce anymore since it causes pain. What can I replace kale or lettuce with?
So that's a great question. So probably for the first 2 years post-gastrectomy, I also had a hard time eating these kinds of greens, kind of raw, crunchy greens. It really just took time. It took time for me to be able to get to the point where I could do that. This would make a fantastic salad with watermelon, and I've done a similar version of that too. If you can tolerate watermelon, cube up some watermelon, toss them with that dressing, add in the blueberries, the peaches, and have a fruit salad on that end. Or you could also use slightly wilted or charred greens. So if you do okay with like spinach, where you've just barely wilted the spinach, that's a little easier to digest. It's not as fibrous as the kale. That would also be good. And quite honestly, you could sip the greens all together, have a nice piece of grilled or broiled salmon, use that dressing just as a light drizzle over the top, chop up the grilled peaches with the blueberries and make almost like a fruit salsa that you put over the salmon. And there's always a way you can kind of take this and tweak it to fit your particular GI. Hey, Alan, good to New Jersey, I think, if I remember correctly. But anyway, that's a great question because, again, just after my total gastrectomy, there's no way I could have eaten this. Now that I'm a few years out, it's something not only can I eat quite often. And if you do okay with things like quinoa, millet, spelt, amaranth, teff, any of those high protein grains, you can make a grain salad like this. Or barley if you don't have a gluten issue, cooked barley. I should preface that with cooked grains. One time I forgot to say that and somebody tried to make a quinoa salad, didn't cook the quinoa and it about broke their teeth. But if you use a cooked grain in place of the green, great protein, especially quinoa. It's a complete protein, has all the amino acids your body needs. So that would make a fantastic grain salad as well. Even these peaches, you could puree them and put them in the salad dressing and use that, as I mentioned, over a piece of grilled fish or a piece of chicken breast. If that's something you can tolerate, you can use these same flavor profiles just in a different capacity. I am going to move this to the side. I'll leave that handy. We'll do a photo at the end. Thank you for those questions, by the way. I appreciate, number one, the feedback, but also if you have the question, there's a good probability that someone else watching has the same question. They just don't know quite when to raise their hand. So the fun part about this Facebook Live thing, of course, if you're watching it after the fact, there's great information here, but the questions and that sort of real-time interaction is so helpful to people that maybe don't do this as often as they would like to, or maybe don't feel confident enough to do this as often as they'd like. I try to make sure when I'm doing these things that I'm never wearing a chef's coat, because I feel like that gives people almost an excuse to not try something. They're like, oh, well, he's a chef, he can do this. Yes, I am, that's what I do for a living, or have done for a living for most of my life, but this kind of stuff is so relevant to my everyday. This is how I fuel this machine. And I mean, it sounds almost redundant to say it, but it's that trash in, trash out analogy, right? So if you're putting garbage in your, the best analogy is I did a demonstration at Porsche headquarters in Atlanta, and looking outside the window and you see these cars that are $120,000, and I asked the group there, these were the employees at Porsche, would you open the gas flap on that vehicle and put a gallon of pancake syrup in there and expect it to run at all, number one, or if it ran, would it run at peak efficiency? And of course everybody laughed at that analogy, but that's exactly what we do to our bodies all the time, is we eat so much garbage. And I don't want to be preachy, but just paying attention to what we put in our machine versus the output that we get. I'm missing so many body parts, but my energy level is crazy up, and I have energy to spare. And I think it's because of how I fuel my machine. It's these types of foods. All right, having said that, I do talk a lot too, but again, if you've ever watched these things, you know that. And I think mainly it's because I get excited. These are the things that, on the one hand, they're sort of easy for me because I've done them for a long time, but every day I get excited about these new combinations. When I go to the farmer's market on Saturday or on Wednesdays here in Jasper, Georgia, I don't know what they're going to have. I have a rough idea, but then sometimes, oh my God. In fact, my son and I just went and found chanterelles in the woods the other day. It's chanterelle season. If you don't know what those are, they're a wonderful wild mushroom, just amazingly good nutrition and delicious. So those kind of things, being not just making a list and going to the grocery store. I have a list when I go to the grocery store, but usually the grocery store or the market tells me what I'm going to make. So it's a kind of a different way to shop, but I think it's a fun way to be able to kind of react to that. Now, we've got our barbecue, sloppy joe, whatever you want to call it, slider filling kind of on the simmer here, but I'm going to pull that off for a second. I want to show you this idea of polenta, which is a fancy way of saying grits. And if you were to ask me the difference between grits and polenta, I would ask you what's the difference between pasta and noodles, right? So it's kind of the same thing, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. But being in the South, we are in grits land. Usually I would say the distinction is grits typically tend to be white, so it's the more kind of lighter colored corn, and polenta tends to be kind of a more yellow corn. And polenta also tends to be a little finer than what we would have for grits. But again, I'm in the South, I live in Georgia, I know my name's Hans, but that's a bit of an oxymoron. But there's a fantastic grist mill in Blairsville, Georgia, called Logan Turnpike. And so I am using the Logan Turnpike grits. They are fantastic, but I wanted to add that protein boost. And when we talked about adding protein earlier, I wanted to do so by adding quinoa, and I'm using red quinoa here for the visual punch. So I wanted to have these kind of speckled fries. You could use white quinoa, you can use the black quinoa, you can use a combination of any of them. I just happen to have the red quinoa and I like that profile. I'm always trying to think of the visual of a meal, and I don't want it to be all beige or all one color. So this is a bit on the light color, but let's talk about how I made this. Now, I can't make everything real time for this because I'm not in the kitchen and we're sort of MacGyvering this as we go. But I cooked, per the package instructions, my grits or my polenta, and while it was still warm, I folded in cooked quinoa. Now they have different cooking times. Quinoa cooks faster than the polenta or the grits. So I went ahead and I typically do have in my refrigerator some grains cooked. I keep things like whole grain sorghum, millet, spelt, amaranth. I keep those kind of things unspiced, unsalted, unflavored, but cooked in the refrigerator. So when I'm ready to make something, whether it be a salad or a soup or even a snack or a breakfast thing, I'll have those grains on the ready. So I folded into my warm grits some cooked quinoa, and then I put that into a buttered, I think this is a 9x9, but whatever size pan you have, just not too deep and not too shallow. This one was a little deep actually, but so I ended up cutting it twice. So let me just kind of show you, after you refrigerate this for a few hours, ideally overnight, you can get these to come out in these nice little wedges. And these make fantastic even side dishes to have 2 or 3 of these on the side. And I'm just gonna, you can bake these, you brush a little olive oil on them, put them in one of those air fryers, put them in the oven for a bit, and then flip them. But I like to do them in a skillet, especially when I don't have an oven. But these are ready to eat just like this. Now, if you look at if you're following the recipe, I added a little bit of nutritional yeast. You can add some fresh herbs to this, particularly things like oregano and thyme work well in there. Some of the softer herbs like basil or tarragon, if you're going that route, I would rather you kind of serve those fresh at the end, either in a salsa or just scattered over the top. They don't hold up so well to high temperature, but things like thyme, rosemary, oregano do really good at those high temps. But I also added a little garlic fresh and a little salt and pepper, and then nutritional yeast. Now I brought along a bag of this, even though I've already kind of made my grits here. But if you're not familiar with nutritional yeast, which is sometimes referred to as nooch, N-O-O-C-H, nooch is it's sort of a byproduct of the brewing and bread baking industry. But it's got B12 in there, and it has 8 grams of protein per serving, and it has, if you've ever had vegan or non-dairy cheese, nutritional yeast or nooch has that kind of cheesy, earthy, umami kind of a flavor. So there are some people that absolutely hate it. My daughter could eat this for breakfast, this entire bag, with some Marmite or Vegemite on top of it. So that sort of yeastiness is a delicious flavor. You can overdo it. So a little bit of that in the mix while it was still warm kind of gives it that little bit of earthy cheesiness. I didn't use cheese because I know some people are sensitive to cheese. I do great with cheese, and that's, I'm not bragging. It's just, it happens to be a fact. As you're kind of learning what your safe foods are, I had a hard time initially with nuts, things like pecans or almonds or Brazil nuts, and then they became the thing that helped me gain weight once I was able to start introducing those into my diet. So what works for one might not work for you. So you just have to find what your tolerance level is on these things. And again, depending on if or when or what surgery you had, you might not be able to eat it right now, or at least you might not be able to eat much in quantity, but eventually you'll be able to add these types of foods as you go. So this can go back in the fridge. You can cut it up and freeze it. Whatever you want to do, this is a great just vehicle for whatever you want to do with it. But what I want to do is this is my French fry substitute. Again, we're kind of going with that 4th of July summery food thing. So I wanted to have something that had a crunch to it, but also had some nutrition happening. So the corn grits, so they're gluten-free. The quinoa is gluten-free. The quinoa has a bit of protein in there. I cut them into roughly fry shapes, and then on kind of medium heat, I'm going to brown these on all sides. Now again, you can do this in the oven, on a piece of parchment paper, or on a silicone baking mat, where you brush them with a little bit of olive oil or whatever you want to do, even butter, or if you have ghee, if you're familiar with ghee, it's G-H-E-E. You can find that pretty much in any grocery store now, but it is a clarified butter product that, even though the only ingredient in there is butter, because they've reduced and reduced and reduced and reduced, it's kind of cooked out some of the, that thing that makes some people lactose intolerant, or somewhat lactose intolerant. Ghee is usually tolerated a little better than straight up butter. And also has sort of a nutty, just wonderful flavor profile to it. So whatever you want to brown this in, but I'm just going to do this kind of over medium heat for a time until I get some crispy edges on that. And that's going to become the basis for our little side dish that's going to go with our Sloppy Joe. My dad went by the name Joe. His name was actually Joachim. He came from Germany, and no one could pronounce his name, so somehow people just started calling him Joe. So this is a bit of a nod to him, the whole Sloppy Joe thing. He's the reason that I got into the kitchen. He had a kidney disease that kind of threatened his life when I was about 18 years old, and I grew up in a restaurant, and so I'd never cooked a thing before in my life. So when my dad's health started to fail, I wanted to get in the kitchen not as a career, but to learn how to do it as a life skill, and immediately fell in love with being in the kitchen. It was not an easy road doing a kind of an apprenticeship with my dad, but it was a lot of fun, and I'm glad that I took the time to learn how to do this. And the great thing about cooking is every single day I learn something new. So it's not like, oh, I know how to cook and then you're done. It's that kind of, I guess with any hobby, once you really kind of get in there and you really have a look around, there's so much knowledge, so much history, so much, almost pageantry to food. But it's not just about what's on the plate, it's about who's across the table, it's about the space that you're in. Right now we're standing in a friend of mine, a restaurant called the Old Mule House right in downtown Jackfruit, Georgia. And it's been a great place for me to kind of flex my culinary muscle a little bit and make food for folks. And anyway, this is meant to be just kind of a fun, comfort kind of a thing happening. All right. I'm using a non-stick skillet, but the brand that I'm using is called a green pan. Again, that is a brand, but it's also a type of pan that doesn't have, what is that stuff called? Teflon, thank you. Yeah, Teflon. We have pet birds in our house, and the fumes from Teflon heating up can kill the birds, and that always just kind of freaked me out. Number one, I don't want to kill my birds, but if you have to have a warning on the pan that the fumes from the pan can kill animals, it's not something that I want to be cooking with for me or for my family. So I'm using this sort of green pan style, and it's basically a ceramic coating that does a great job of leaving things non-stick. If you're doing this in a traditional skillet, more than likely the sort of residual stickiness of the grits, you might end up with a bit of a mess. Even in a non-stick skillet, it wants to stick just a tiny bit, so you have to kind of give it a little shove, but you can see that little crispy edge happening there. Let me turn this down. All right, so as this is kind of doing its thing, where are we at time-wise anyway? I'm just running away. We're already 45 minutes into this. All right, so I'm going to do our last little component of our meal, which is the dessert. And dessert is not something that I normally mess with too much because I can't do sweets the way I used to. And I kind of hinted at this earlier, but when you've had any kind of GI issue, oftentimes the diabetic component or the blood sugar insulin component is way different. So with no stomach, my body is still flooding my system with insulin when it detects sugars, but usually it's more than I need, and so it ends up where I get shakes and I sometimes have a blood sugar crash. So I have kind of eliminated a lot of desserts from my life. But I wanted to do something with berries because we're right in the season of berries. And with chia seeds. So I first knew of chia seeds from the Chia Pet commercial, 70s, 80s, I don't know, where you spread the seeds on the terracotta thing and they kind of grow out from there. And so I wanted to make something with chia seeds. They're kind of a hot item right now, but the thing that made them able to stick to that terracotta donkey or whatever it is that you're trying to grow is that the seeds themselves have this sort of protective coating around them when they get wet. So they swell up and they have this sort of gelatinous coating, which actually aids in digestion. It kind of helps if you have, again, hate to talk bowels while we're doing food, but if you do have constipation issues, it's one of those things that really kind of helps keep the pipes moving. This is the best polite way I can say that. But it's also kind of a thickener. So, you know, at first glance, you might think I have a collection of frog eggs here. And I'll be honest, it does look a little bit like frog eggs, but they are delicious. So I took my chia seeds and I soaked them in almond milk. Now, if you have a sweetened almond milk, you might not need to add any sweetener. It might, if you like the flavor, or if it's vanilla or whatever it is, you have almond or flax milk or oat milk or whatever plant-based milk that you like. I just soaked them overnight, and so they get this wonderful pudding consistency, and it's a very inexpensive way to make a pudding. You can buy a prepared version of this in a little cup. It's like $5, but it's probably 10 cents worth of chia seeds. So it just takes a little bit of forethought. I did this overnight to make this pudding. Very simple. I literally just stirred the chia seeds into the almond milk in this case. I put just a drizzle of maple syrup in this one. You can put a little vanilla extract if you like. But I'm just going to make a simple parfait, and to that end, I'm using, this happens to be a grain-free granola. Has a little cinnamon, honey kind of a thing, a little touch of sea salt. But you can even use your favorite dry cereal. I mean, literally Cheerios would be good in this, or Raisin Bran, or any kind of flaky cereal would do good as well. So since I don't have many blueberries, I'm switching to blackberries, and we're just going to parfait this, right? So I'm going to do a layer of my blackberries, and then a scoop of my chia seeds, and then we'll go another layer. This time, well, let's do a little crunch there. We'll do a layer of my granola, and then I'll do some strawberries. And this goes in any direction. If you have bananas, if you have grapes would even be good. Whatever you have and whatever you feel like. Honestly, it's just a great vehicle and a great summery, cool dessert that you can make ahead of time, keep it in the fridge. I'll put, do I still have any blueberries? Yeah, here we go. I'll throw a couple blueberries on there. And then I have tons of fresh mint in my garden. So a little mint on that. And that becomes just a real simple, easy, delicious, and again, something you can make ahead of time. Put it in the fridge, forget about it. This will last easily a week in the fridge, if it lasts that long, because what I find myself doing is just going back to it and eating it time and time again. Especially in the summer months, chia seeds help with hydration. So if you have a history of becoming somewhat dehydrated, adding chia seeds in any form, even if you put them in your iced tea, is a great way to keep that hydration up. All right, any questions as we're getting ready to plate here? Yeah.
What do you recommend to cook with, and do you have a brand that you recommend?
You know, it's funny. For years, I have said I need to be like one of those NASCAR drivers and have like the brands that I like, and of course, they should pay me to do that. But I do love. There is a German cookware company that's called Berndes, Berndes, and that is one of my favorites. And they've been in the States for a while, but they're not always easy to find. I am also notoriously cheap. So I tend to kind of scavenge the home goods, TJ Maxx-y kind of places, looking for my favorite brands on some sort of a reduction. But Berndes makes good ones. Green Pan, as I mentioned earlier, is a good one. Cuisinart makes some good ceramic non-stick. If you want to spend some real money, you can go into things like Le Creuset, which is a fantastic brand, and they have that sort of cast iron enamel. I use a lot of induction cooking, so I do tend to use induction-friendly pots and pans, and Le Creuset is an excellent brand. It is expensive, but you kind of get what you pay for, and you only have to buy it once, and it's the kind of thing you can leave to your children, although your children might not want your pots and pans. But once they learn how to cook, they're probably going to want your pots and pans if you have things like Berndes or Cuisinart or Chantal is another one. So there's some really good ones out there, but off the top of my head, that Berndes, Berndes, makes some really fantastic, and they're that healthy non-stick. They're not the Teflon non-stick. All right, these guys are crisping up nicely, so let's put together our kind of final meal here. Now, typically when I eat a sandwich, I eat it open face because I don't want to waste my limited real estate on a lot of bread. But to that end, I'm using slider buns today. I thought that might be kind of a fun size. Here is our Jackfruit Sloppy Joes. Now, I'm kind of pushed on time, but what I would typically do is go through and kind of break up these bigger pieces a little bit, right? So I want to get that more pulled pork consistency of the jackfruit. And it's nice and soft. It just needs some time being kind of smushed up, right? So, oh, gotcha. So we aren't on a tight time. So if you have to bow out, I'm sorry about that, but I'm going to run here as long as we need to. But anyway, so you can see how this kind of breaks up, and it really does look and feel like pulled pork or pulled chicken. And oftentimes you'll see it in crab cakes, in vegan or vegetarian crab cakes, they'll use jackfruit because some of these pieces really do have the look and feel and consistency of lump crab meat. Now, I have not made this spicy. I used to love spicy food, but the spice component now is a little too rough for me these days. So it's spiced and it's tomatoey and it's great, but it's not spicy or so acidic that it's going to cause me lots of GI distress. So there is a good slider. A sort of normal stomach person might be able to eat 2 or 3 of those, but one is good for me. Let me get a pair of tongs here. And then we'll get some of our speckled polenta fries with the red quinoa. Those in there. And then I always love to have some kind of an herbal component. I've got some fresh thyme from my garden. And it's one of those things that I could talk about herbs for hours. They thrive on neglect. They don't need anything fancy as far as soils or fertilizers. And the more you cut them, the more they make. So oftentimes people will get excited, they'll get their first herbs and they're like, oh, I'm growing some thyme, but they're just babying it. But really they want to be hacked and slashed, and almost every time you cut it, they now sprout out in 2 directions, and so they really do double and triple, and so all summer long, and even with things like rosemary and thyme, you might have them all winter long, that flavor, and then nothing replaces that. I mean, even standing here, just from touching that thyme, it is so fantastic. Super healthy, easy little thing to do. That's also great in a taco. It's great on a pita bread or on a tostada. Just a great thing. It looks ridiculous next to my giant salad, but there's kind of what I was thinking for our summer meal. So we've got our grilled peach and nectarine salad with the honey vinaigrette. We've got our sloppy joe jackfruit sliders, our speckled polenta and quinoa fries, and then our berry and chia parfait. And all of this you can make ahead of time, hold it. This will hold for at least a week in the refrigerator, or if you wanted to freeze it, if you wanted to add beans to this and turn it into a chili, it would be fantastic. So I tried to do things that are versatile and multi-use, that will give you a lot of mileage, so that if you can't eat a lot right now, it's something you can keep and nibble on or graze on throughout the day, throughout the week, and of course take them in any direction you want to take them. If you have issues with the stomach acid, if you still have a partial stomach, you can substitute the canned tomato sauce for yellow tomatoes, and you can cook down the yellow tomatoes. They're far less acid, and make a wonderful sauce out of that and lose that acidity. Any other questions or thoughts? I know I'm not seeing the comments directly, but before we kind of wrap up on these things, anything I breezed by too quickly that I need to clarify on, or you got any last minute thoughts here? I'd love to. Who we got watching? Well, I actually have a hard time hearing you because of all the noise in the restaurant. Well, shout out to everybody for tuning in and spending an hour with us, no matter where you are. And a big shout out not only to Debbie's Dream, but also to the Gastric Cancer Foundation, who I've been a part of for years, and proud to see us working together on projects like this. And also to our corporate sponsors who kind of helped make this happen too. As much as, it's not fun to talk about, these things cost money, and they require a lot of time and energy and effort, and we couldn't do these things without the backing of our corporate sponsors. who make this happen. And also, again, for you watching, whether you are a part of the gastric cancer community or whether you just happen to stop by because you wanted to learn something for the summer, your feedback, your enthusiasm, your questions, your sharing, again, it's not a financial thing for us, but it is it helps kind of create a platform where we can do more and more and more of these things. So if this is something you enjoyed, if it's something you want to see more of, let us know so that we know kind of what direction we need to go in. Or even to that end, if there's a food question or an idea or something you'd like to see on an episode like this, send those in too, because again, if you have that question, there's a really good chance that somebody else has that question as well. So
somebody was interested to know how difficult was it to transition to eating without a stomach? I mean, you've been on this journey a long time.
Okay, yeah.
What was that like?
So yeah, great question. So transitioning. Now, I'm a bit of a unicorn in that I lived a good while from 2005 until I think about 2011 with half a stomach. So originally they removed the upper portion of my stomach and the lower portion of my esophagus, leaving me with what the doctors jokingly called a stomophagus. And I had to kind of relearn how to eat twice. So I had my challenges with the half stomach, mainly because I was still producing stomach acid, but I didn't have the valve anymore that prevented that stomach acid from coming up and causing spillovers or aspiration. Somebody's moving my food. Anyway, once I kind of got the hang of that, we had some issues where I had some swallowing problems, I had problems with leakage, with food was actually spilling over and going into my lungs, which caused all sorts of issues. And so in 2011, the decision was made to remove all of my stomach and pretty much all of my esophagus except for about an inch. They then took my jejunum, which I'd never heard that word before, but they took that part of my intestines and connected it where my esophagus had been. So now when I eat, things go straight into my intestines, and so they can either hit me like a bolus where it's too much too fast when it comes to things like fats and sugars and greasy foods, or even alcohol hit me too quickly. What really took, what really made me turn that curve was paying attention to what I ate. And we sometimes kind of forget the throwaway foods. Like if you're in an office and they have a Halloween candy and they've got those little tiny Snickers bars, you think, well, I'll eat that. And then an hour later you're having a crash and you're thinking, what did I eat for lunch? But it wasn't what you ate for lunch, it was that little bite of candy. And so it was at sort of the insistence of my nutritionist at MD Anderson that I kept a food journal, writing down every single thing that passed my lips, even vitamins, because oftentimes the vitamins were hitting me too much, too fast. So keeping that journal of everything that I consumed kind of helped me see a pattern of what foods I was eating and how did I feel afterwards. So I know I've given that advice to some of you directly, but if you're just getting into this journey, or even again if you're a sort of a normal person, paying attention to how you're fueling your machine can make the difference between having a great day or having a day where you just feel tired and you can't focus and you're lethargic. And so me being a foodie and a chef, I really kind of resisted that notion for a long time, thinking, well, I know about food, I know how it's going to affect me. And so I would still sneak and get the gelato, or I would get greasy French fries or whatever it was as a treat. But in fact, I was really sort of punishing myself and having these crazy episodes of either nausea or dumping syndrome or fatigue, even being kind of lightheaded at times. So it was really paying attention to plant-forward or plant-based foods, high-protein foods, low glycemic index foods, complex carbohydrates, lots of fiber, kind of all the things I think you already know, but you might think is somebody else's problem. But the reality is, when you start paying attention to those things, you're not really, again, limiting yourself. You're just kind of, it's almost like the best of collection, right? You're kind of picking those foods that they taste good, they're easy to prepare, they're nutritionally dense, they're comforting. So that little bit of advice of keeping that food journal was the thing that helped me transition from being a sort of a normal eater to a more focused eater.
So also, sort of following up with that, you hit on some of it. What are maybe some of the foods that you would say stay away from?
Sure. So as close as you can get to the natural food, and again, that sounds almost like a Pollyanna thing, but most prepackaged foods are not packaged for their freshness or their nutritional content. They're packaged for profitability and convenience, right? So and whether it's prepackaged in the sense of grab and go from the grocery store or whether it's drive-through kind of foods. You know, to make a meal in 3 minutes from the time you order the food to the time you pick it up, a lot of shortcuts have been made there. And again, sometimes I'm hesitant to have this conversation because people think, oh, he's just bashing all fast food. I'm still in the drive-through from time to time as well. So it's not like I'm above all of this, right? There are times where we have to eat quick and conveniently, but that's usually a trade-off when it comes to nutrition. So staying away from those foods that are, again, those sort of convenience foods that are high in salt, high in fats, high in sugar. And you hear that on so many fronts. It's not only about gastric cancer, it's about diabetes, it's about obesity, it's even about hypertension or heart disease. All of those things share that similarity, is in that the closer you get to the natural food, the grain, the fruit, the vegetable, the green, the better it is for you, and the more nutrition it has in it. And even as we talked about earlier, most fruits and vegetables raw have in them the digestive enzymes that our body needs to break them down. But once you cook them past about 145, 150 degrees, you're actually degrading or disintegrating, destroying those digestive enzymes. And so our body does create its own digestive enzymes, but at a cost. So we're actually end up spending more energy to try to break down the food, so it becomes a negative equation. So not to go into a math lesson, because that's not my favorite subject, but you want it to be a positive equation. You want it to be a positive experience all the way around, but you want to be able to get more out of the meal than it takes to break it down. And so by doing those lightly cooked or threatened, as I say, fruits and vegetables, or raw fruit and vegetables is a great way to get the full nutrition of the thing. So, with that, we're going to do more things like this, whether it's here or whether it's at sort of my home. I keep using air quotes today. Apparently those are contagious. I picked those up somewhere. I apologize. But anyway, we, as I mentioned, have a regular series that we do over at gastriccancer.org. But I am super proud that my friends at Debbie's Dream Foundation asked me to come and play today with them. And I know so many of you from the advocacy we do in Washington, D.C. every year. So I'm proud to be able to have one foot kind of in each stirrup here and be a part of both teams. So if this is the kind of thing you're looking for more of this information, gastriccancer.org. We're going to have this on the Debbie's Dream Foundation website for future. It'll live here on Facebook as well. And feel free to reach out to me directly. I'm a very approachable guy when it comes to these things. So happy to help in any way that I can moving forward. Shout out again to our corporate sponsors for making this happen. That goes a long way, and this kind of a resource. The number one question that patients ask is about nutrition, yet it is often the least focused. It becomes an afterthought. But the physicians and surgeons who do the work, it's kind of up to us. This is the one thing that we as patients or we as people can do, is we can control kind of what goes in and out of our machine. And so pay attention to that. Again, I don't want it to become academic for you. I don't want it to become a chore. Enjoy your time in the kitchen. Enjoy your time creating foods that are delicious, nutritious, and kind of fun. So that's my goal. I hope you guys had a great time. I always look forward to this. And I'm due up for some lunch. I'm supposed to be eating pretty much nonstop through the day, and having spent the last hour hanging out with you guys, it's time for me to eat something. Until our next chance to get together, take care of yourself. If you can't take care of yourself, take care of others. And as always, Gesundheit. Thank you, guys.